Yeah,
One
and
more
the
thing to add
protocol.
to this, I went back and looked at all of those 25 different youth and child data sets, and I ran those precision scores for those too. They were as much as 25% variability.
Wow.
Some were as low as 5, but especially on the ones that had lower mean scores, they were all over the place. So what I was seeing is comparing looking at that for adults versus in kids, it may vary a lot more in kids than it does in adult populations. So doing this kind of individual scanning in kids will at least let you see what the individual scores are, so you know if there are problems.
That is a wonderful recommendation, because we keep saying that the carotenoid is the objective measure, but as you're saying, maybe we should not say that because of this variability.
What did the study results show for you, Alicia? Did you see significant findings?
In terms of change in carotenoid status, across the 25 studies, the 25 evaluations in kids, 4 of them had significant increases in fruit and vegetable intake. 2 were also very practically significant increases. And in those cases, they were providing green smoothies multiple times, like on a regular basis. So the kids were ingesting a lot more fruits and vegetables than they had been previously. My group has never seen a change in fruit and vegetable intake from small changes that are just like 1 or 2 things. So at least in terms of Vegemeter score, it has to be a combination, like multi-pronged approach to get Vegemeter score to change, is what we have seen in the evaluations we've done. So it can't just be add a salad bar or just do school gardens. It has to be multiple things. One group in Texas did see a significant increase using the Vegemeter as an objective measure, using school gardens, but they were very meticulous in their implementation, and they didn't let the teachers teach the lessons that went along with it. Their staff taught the lessons. So like there's a lot of complexity connected to it.
And we'll collect the citation. Alicia mentioned that the manuscript is under review at the moment, so we'll definitely make sure to circulate that once published, so that everyone can see the findings from that. As well as the recording from the morning session, we'll circulate that, so people can recap Alicia's talk if they were not able to attend. Any other questions? This is a wonderful discussion. We have a couple topics for our open discussion, which we'll transition to next. If there are no other specific questions for Valerie's work.
I had one more question. So for assessing fruit and vegetable intake, what tools do you recommend, or what tools have you had luck with using with like the school age population, with children, even preschoolers?
Yeah, we use the liking survey.
The liking survey.
Yep, I have a lot of data to support its validity. Construct criterion, and it's very simple, and I know that there's more precise, but at some point when you get so much precision, the participation falls off, and that's not what I'm trying to do. And also I have even measures of usability and feasibility or usefulness of messages that were tailored to what people say they like, and people say they're very helpful, and they base intervention on it. So I mean, to me, it is completely feasible. But again, if you want more precision, and we do, we do some kind of frequency and the liking survey, because cognitive science says it's very easy to recall liking, and it usually and we have found that it reflects usual behavior dating back to all my work with taste. Okay. Taste is the primary driver of what we eat, and it's really how much you like the taste. So
thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think in children, specifically college students as well, where we know recall has so many challenges, I think something a little less detailed might actually give us more accurate results. So that was really interesting to see that tool implemented. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and move into our open discussion. I have a couple topics that were brought up by some of our members here today. So wanted to start with those. So one of the questions was about the use of the different fingers. I know, Alicia, you briefly touched on this, but a lot of people are posting their methods in papers utilizing the Vegimeter at this time and are using the ring finger versus the index finger and having different finger uses. So just wanted to see kind of if there were any thoughts or comments on that. I think in the protocol, we mention the use of the ring finger on the non-dominant hand, and we detail some of the physiological reasons why. So someone mentioned callousing earlier. There's less callousing on the ring finger compared to the index finger. In terms of musculature, slight differences there as well. And then in terms of, Alicia mentioned the coloring on the fingers. So we tend to use our index and thumb more commonly for things like eating and different tasks that might introduce chromophores that can compete with the measurement device. So those are kind of some of the justifications that we detailed in the protocol, but I wanted to see and open this space for any additional thoughts on that. Alicia, anything to add?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I agree totally with what you all have put in that protocol paper. I think you did a great job of explaining a lot of the different things that we should be thinking about there. As I'm reading what's being published in the literature recently, many people are running a simple analysis. Did finger make a difference in my sample? And then they're concluding finger doesn't matter. But that conclusion related to a specific study is usually right-handed versus left-handed people. Left-handed people are only about 7-ish% of the population. So you have a huge difference in sample size if you're standardizing dominant versus non-dominant hands. So making that comparison, like in that way, and using that as the justification for saying finger doesn't matter at all for the Vegimeter, I think we need to just be thoughtful about what that means. It means in that study, whether their right hand ring finger or their left hand ring finger was used, that was not influential in their results. But broadly speaking, finger does matter. Like if I'm comparing my study where I measure left ring fingers, non-dominant ring fingers, and I'm comparing to a study, trying to think, there are a couple researchers who very typically still use the index finger. If I compare my data with theirs, it's going to be pretty different. And do you actually have a second? I have one slide that I could show.
Yeah, please.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So these are some of the preliminary data from this same collection of however many thousands of data points when we measured tons of things on everybody. So we have 200 plus participants. They're adults. I was putting this together for my class, actually. I always get the order of presenting wrong.
No problem.
Push the present button first and then share. Okay. So this is measuring every finger of each participant. I know on the left side it says standardizing by cradle. What you're seeing is actually just for the regular cradle. I have a similar one for the child cradle as well. But When we look, I don't have all the statistically significant differences marked here, but the two most common things, if we're talking about majority population, most people are right-handed. So my protocol would say I'm measuring their left ring finger. Some other labs would be measuring their right index finger. If we compare those two, which you can see using that bracket at the top to kind of point those out, left ring versus right index, those are pretty different. And when you run the test between them, they're statistically different. So within my sample of 208 people, 208 adults, which finger I measure does matter quite a bit. So if I'm doing an intervention and I am assuming that a 20-point swing, a 20-point increase in Veggiemeter score, for example, means that this participant has had a significant increase in fruit and vegetable intake, that could be just wiped out by measuring a different finger. It could, if I measure the wrong finger, I might think that they have increased their fruit and vegetable intake when they didn't. Or when we're making comparisons, like I said, across labs, we might think, oh, people who live in Japan are healthier than people who live in Utah. They eat more fruits and vegetables. Well, maybe they do, and maybe we're measuring differently too. So this also hasn't been published. This isn't even this. I just analyzed this like 3 days ago.
So from a publication perspective, I think most people share their protocol in the paper, but do we think like this is something that absolutely should be recorded? Like which finger is measured as, you know, when we think about it, a repository of, you know, necessary data to standardize across studies?
I would say that it does, because if you're trying to run a meta-analysis, or from a public health perspective, we're trying to establish at what point are you safe? How high does my score have to be for, like we've done with blood pressure? If you're 120/80, you're in the healthy range. You get higher than that, now we have to do something about it. When we're trying to come up with those ways of acting on Veggiemeter data, we have to be able to know that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, that brings up a great point. And you know, I think the whole protocol that was published a couple years ago was to at least set a baseline, but we published that paper with the understanding and the assumption that the more we learn about this device, that protocol will change. And so if it's going to shift from non-dominant ring finger to you know, as long as you're recording the finger that you use, I think many of us still would advocate for the use of the non-dominant ring finger, but making sure that that is known. And that was one of the whole purposes of the protocol, was no one was publishing what they were doing. So making those, you know, cross study assumptions or generalizability of the data is really challenging to do when we have no idea what everyone was actually implementing.
And I would say your approach is exactly right. I would still say we should be trying to, for all the reasons you mentioned, use non-dominant ring finger. But no matter what, we should be reporting what finger we're using.
Yeah. And I know at the last forum, Susan Sisson's group presented, and they were doing a lot with device variability. And I think they also looked at some finger differences as well. I don't think that work has been published yet either. But hopefully soon we'll have, you know, at least more data on the differences by finger. Because I think, you know, sometimes in the heat of the moment when you're collecting data, you might not prioritize that. But in reality, we really need to be at least trying to streamline those processes.
So I have a general question. If there's this amount of variability, which is fascinating, to me, I think the recommendation should not be to treat this as the only outcome.
And I think we're leaning very heavily on that as well, or limiting its use as well for cross-sectional data and using it primarily as a pre-post measurement, because if there is so much variability, at least limiting to the individual might reduce some of that.